Hello, I'm your host Jim McQuillan. Welcome to a rather festive themed episode of the BanterFlix movie review show here on NVTV. Let's see what we'll be talking about tonight. This week's show is a Christmas Carol Christmas special as we look back at 4 different versions of Charles Dickens' classic tale, from Henry Edwards' 1935 Scrooge to Brian Henson's Muppet Christmas Carol, which this year celebrates its 30th anniversary. So that's what we've lined up for you this week, and hoping to fill the show with some festive cheer, more joy than the ghost of Christmas past, is local writer Maria McQuillan.
Hi Jim.
And BanterFlix's very own Deputy Editor Joe McElroy.
Merry Christmas, Jim.
Merry Christmas, you filthy animal, you should be saying, but that's a different franchise. Look, we are going to try and cram in 4 different versions of the same Charles Dickens tale in this week's show. So let's not beat around the Christmas tree. Let's get stuck into our first version of the film.
I am the ghost of Christmas present.
God bless us, everyone.
So that's a look at Henry Edwards' Scrooge. It was out in 1935. Maria, I'm going to come to you first. I know we're going to be talking about the same film 4 times, but I think the important thing to note for this is that it is the first version of Charles Dickens' tale that is produced for the big screen with sound. There had been silent versions before this. We will say right from the get-go that this is freely available on YouTube. There's not a lot of prints in good quality left for this title in conditions, but nearly 87 years old at a quick sum of maths in my head. But what did you think of this version of the film?
It felt like kind of a very just solid adaptation of it, you know, like it wasn't by any means my favourite of the ones that I watched, but if you are a fan of that era of film, I feel like you'll still enjoy it for what it is and for like the accomplishment it was, you know. Yeah, there was parts of it I really enjoyed, like the appearance of the Marley. His first appearance, I genuinely was quite like, oh, that's quite spooky. Like it's well done the way they've created the like kind of creepy atmosphere. You do get a bit of a sense of dread because you don't see him. And yeah, I enjoyed the film, but yeah, it wasn't to say my favourite of the 4, I have to say.
It's not my favourite either. I know we are going to be talking about Muppet's Christmas Carol. Sorry, spoilers. I'm going to probably let the card of the way, viewers. I do love that version of the film. But I was impressed by how a film that's, as I've mentioned, nearly 90 years of age, and you can see what an influence it's had on the other versions that we're going to be talking about specifically here. I mean, we're talking just 4 that we've picked. But you've mentioned the ghosts in this. I think this film is quite inventive with what it does. I mean, it's only the Ghost of Christmas Present, I believe, is seen on screen. I mean, the Ghost of Christmas Past is literally just more or less just kind of an apparition of white. We don't see Ghost of Christmas Future or Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. I think it's mostly done through shadow. And when we think of the various other versions we're going to talk about, Mickey's Christmas Carol, well, maybe slightly different there, but they have all become their cliched, kind of stereotypical view, and I think this is something quite different. Something I will come back to with another version of the film, another version of the tale, is I don't maybe necessarily buy the transformation of Scrooge in this as I do in others, but that's just maybe necessarily for me. It is quite stagey. Seymour Hicks, who's the actor portraying Scrooge, he had played him on stage. And I suppose you've got to think back, it's 1935, what you can do with cameras and what you can do with sets now as opposed to what you could have done back then. Of course, it's going to feel a little bit stagey. I know that when I was reading up, it is kind of, Henry Edwards was influenced by kind of Fritz Lang, and you can see that in that kind of German expressionism. I thought it was an impressive adaptation. I liked it much more than I thought I would, but like Maria, it's not necessarily going to be my pick of the Dickens. There we go, I've said it already. It's not necessarily my pick of the Dickens for this week's show. What about you, Joe?
I quite enjoyed it. I thought it was a good, solid adaptation of the novel, but I'm sort of along the lines of yourselves, you know, there's nothing really spectacular that stands out about it, but it is very impressive for the year it was made at the same time. It starts very stagey, but then as the story progresses, it does expand a bit more, and there's some, you know, very nice camera work in it, especially for its time. Especially, there's a party, and those attending are singing "God Save the Queen," and the way the camera moves around the room is fantastic. And then it cuts to the poor outside, and that disparity, you know, does touch upon, you know, the politics and class difference in that way, which was quite good. Seymour Hicks, I thought he was quite a good Scrooge. He was just a real curmudgeon of a character, and it really shines through. A bit like over the top, but that's the sort of style of acting that you would have had, you know, as you were entering the sound era of cinema. And I was really impressed more than anything with the interpretation of the ghosts. You know, Maria mentioned, you know, Marley, the way you don't see him at all, but it's the voice acting was fantastic. You know, the Ghost of Christmas Past, the way they have that as an apparition of just a glowing apparition was great, and the Ghost of Christmas to Come, it was very creepy the way it was all done in shadow. So it does have that sort of spooky and gothic edge to it, which I really liked.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I appreciated, the fact that it's weird. It didn't do anything different because, you know, this is one of the early adaptations on the big screen. But it's weird how other films, their visual style and the kind of approaches they've took with and the decisions they've made on screen have had a lasting legacy that have now been replicated and replicated. You know, this year we've had Spirited, which I know you've seen, Joe. I'm not sure if you've seen, Maria, which is kind of, we should have, I suppose, maybe threw into the mix with our Dickens versions of the film. But there will be, in 2023, 24, 25, there will be more versions of this that will probably copy things. And I was surprised that this was doing its own thing and elements that haven't been replicated. One thing I will say, I was rather shocked, and we will come to this, I'm sure, with Muppet's Christmas Carol. It's quite graphic with poor Tiny Tim. It's not one of the films, sorry viewers, it is a timeless tale. If you don't know the story of Christmas Carol, I'm sorry, you need to have either read it or watched it or listened to it. There's various audio versions of it as well. But Tiny Tim, his death, which we have seen alluded to in other versions, it's quite graphically seen. Not graphically, but it's vividly portrayed on screen. And I was surprised by that. I don't know, was that something for you, Maria, that you found kind of quite sure? I think it's only 2 or 3 times that's ever been seen in the adaptations of the tale. We've only ever seen poor old Tiny Tim laid out at rest once or twice in the history on the big screen.
Yeah, I didn't think of it that way, to be honest. You know, I think maybe because I think in my head I didn't even realise the difference, if that makes sense. But yeah, I suppose at the time they were just like, we're going to really hit home with what's happening here. Because like you say, I suppose in all, 3 of them, like, they really are for children. Though I suppose Scrooge is another question mark. But like, you know, I suppose maybe that's a part of it, is that they don't want to show it because it's very much for kids. But like you say, it's like, I felt it as well with the scene where the Ghost of Christmas Present says to him, like, you know, Tiny Tim's not going to make it if things don't change. And it's like, oh my God, like, they're not holding back here, you know? And I think to the audience who would have gone through at that point a war, and a horrendous one, and they're on their way to another one, unfortunately, it's probably just kind of like, this is the reality, you know? If things don't change for this family because of this horrible, curmudgeonly old man, that's the reality of child mortality, you know?
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, I think, as you've mentioned, Ray, there is that line where they kind of talk about where the Ghost of Christmas Present, he turns to Scrooge and says, you know, well, this is what you wanted. You know, the poor, they are not taking up taxpayers' money. So yeah, it's there for effect. And I think even now in 2022, I'm being honest, I think it still packs a punch. Joe, for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing that hit me more than anything from the film, especially when you look at the way things are now with the cost of living crisis and everything. You know, the fact that, you know, they have this Ebenezer character, like, he could help people, but he chooses not to. But I'm not going to go down that road. It's not that kind of show. But no, it really did hit hard, because, like yourself and Maria, I was a bit shocked. I was like, whoa, it's actually showing wee Tiny Tim, because it's usually just through the image of, you know, his hat or his crutch or something like that there. So I would give it credit for doing something like that, you know, really not holding back and not pulling any punches. It really was effective in that respect.
Yeah, like you, I enjoyed the film much more than what I thought I would. I didn't think a film that was that old, 90-year-old, would work as well, considering there's so many versions of A Christmas Carol out there. But look, let's move on now to something completely different. This is something, we're going to move to the 1980s. We're going to move to the much safer territory of Disney.
I've come to give you a wreath and invite you to Christmas dinner.
Well, I suppose you're going to have plump goose with chestnut dressing?
Yep.
And will you have plum pudding and lemon sauce?
Yeah, boy, oh boy.
And candied fruits with spiced sugar cakes?
Yeah, will you come?
Are you daft, man? You know I can't eat that stuff. Here's your wreath back. Now out, out, out! Bah! Humbug!
Merry Christmas!
So that's a look at Mickey's Christmas Carol. It's available on Disney Plus. This is where we all seen this, but I'm sure both of you, well, I don't know. I have very vivid memories of watching this when I was younger. I'm not sure if I have it on VHS or it was recorded. It's what, half an hour long? You know, it's just, it just shows you what you can do with this tale and how simply it can be laid out and how much, as I've mentioned, it's a half an hour long. All the key elements of Dickens' tale is showcased there. And we have films here that are clocking in at 2 hours. There's versions of Christmas Carol I know go over 2 hours in their runtime. This is just Disney being pure Disney. I think from memory this started out as a radio play and then was adapted. There was more music in the radio adaptation. There's not much music here. But Joe, I'm going to come to you first. I don't know whether it's going to rate for you in the various versions we're looking at tonight, but watching this, that kind of, the glasses of nostalgia crept on. Scrooge McDuck as Scrooge, perfect.
You've just manipulated me. You've touched into all those keystones. No, yeah, like you, I didn't actually realise when you'd mentioned that we were going to be reviewing this that I'd actually seen it before. But within 5 minutes, I recognised the opening piece of music. I recognised, you know, the various little images from the animation. I was like, I've seen this so many times as a child, and like you, I think it was on video that we would have had it, and it was a nice warm hug of nostalgia, if I'm being honest. I do, like you, think it is actually a really good adaptation in terms of hitting all the key beats and the key emotions that are within the story within half an hour, and the fact that that's accessible for very young viewers as well, it's very important as well, because, you know, ultimately it's one of the most important, you know, tales out there, and it is very important for families of all ages to watch it, and I really enjoyed it. I really, really did. And the animation's very, very good as well. So I would give it a thumbs up.
Yeah, it's a thumbs up for me as well. I don't know how much nostalgia is creeping into that. Other thing I like about the film is the fact that it's coming back to, it's treating the Disney creations as actors. So you're kind of aware, and it sounds a really stupid thing to say, it's Scrooge McDuck being Scrooge. We have Mickey Mouse in there, we have Minnie Mouse, although she doesn't get much dialogue, you know, how times have changed, but we have other, they're not just like the Ghost of Christmas Past, Present and Future, they are played by known Disney creations, which I think is just a really subtle way of probably manipulating us as viewers to get engaged with the story, but I think it's also a very clever thing to do to probably get younger viewers engaged into that story. I don't know, but Maria, what about you? Did you watch this when you were younger? Do you have that nostalgia like Joe and I have?
See, I don't remember watching this. I could very well have watched it, but when I was watching it, I was like, I don't think I've seen this before. So I kind of enjoyed it as a novelty because I didn't actually know that this was one of the Disney properties. And I actually liked as well that it was a half-hour version of it because, like you say, it kind of gets to very much to the heart of every beat of the story. That was part of what I enjoyed, was actually because I didn't know who was playing who. I was like, this is great. You know, whenever they revealed that the Ghost of Christmas Future, or What Is Yet to Come, was Pete, I was like, oh, that's great. That's really, you know, like it was stuff like that. And similarly, I was like, who's going to play Marley? And then it was Goofy, which I thought was hilarious. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. Yeah, just quite clever, like you say, to kind of fit in characters. I'd also not seen a Scrooge McDuck production in quite some time, so I'd forgotten that he has the really thick Scottish accent, which I enjoyed.
Yeah, it's just a joy, and I know that we haven't done them for a while. We regularly do a We Need to Talk About Disney podcast with our resident Disney Queen, Victoria Brown, who unfortunately hasn't been too well. We were hoping to get her on for this. Joe, you stepped in at the last minute, so thank you very much for that. Victoria, if you're watching, hope you're well. But one thing we always talk about with our Disney theme pods is how these are gateway drugs for younger viewers. And I think this version, along with the Muppets Christmas Carol, which I know we're going to talk about, is a perfect gateway drug into that Dickens tale that then you can go off and maybe when you're a little bit older or not, in the case of me, watch stuff like Scrooge when you're probably far too young to appreciate half of what's going on and realise how much is going over your head, but let's not pull on that thread. But for you, Joe, I mean, coming back to that point, you watched this when you were younger. I have the nostalgia. If I think I'm really honest, my nostalgia for Christmas Carol comes from stuff like this. And maybe when I was older then, because 92 I would have been 10 by this point, 84 when this was out, I was 2, so it was maybe a couple of years later, about 6, I would have been watching this before I would have been watching Muppets Christmas Carol. But a perfect gateway drug into Dickens' tale.
Oh, definitely. I know, without a doubt, I think that's the case. Like, I have a 2-year-old niece. I know she might be a bit too young for this, but having said that, she watches the likes of Toy Story. She understands the emotional beats within those. Like, I think in the second one, when Jessie sings about her song, she always just turns around and goes, sad. She understands. So I think she may have similar resonance with a tale like this here. So, like you said, this is the gateway, and then it leads to Muppet Christmas Carol and so on and so forth. So yeah, definitely. Yeah,
and she's old enough to watch Die Hard already. 2-year-old, you know, the quintessential Christmas movie. Maria, I know we're going to move on, but for you, perfect gateway drug into Disney's back catalogue and into Dickens' tale as well?
Well, I think that's the thing that's nice about it is, like, if a kid was to watch this and really love it, like you say, it's their way into a lot of other Disney properties. But similarly, you feel like a relative could go, well, let's get them the book if they like the film that much.
Yeah, there we go. So not even are we giving you recommendations for movies, but if you're still like me, leaving everything to the last minute Christmas Eve, there's an idea for a possible present, picking up the book itself at Waterstones. Other bookstores I know are available. Right, we're going to move on to something completely different, but we're going to stick to the 80s, and we're going to go for Richard Donner's Scrooged.
I got into broadcasting because I like to give.
Hey, that's my cab.
Sometimes I found myself hurting from giving too much.
Fire these people.
But it's Christmas.
Bah humbug.
You are going to be visited by 3 ghosts. Expect the first one tomorrow at noon.
God, tomorrow's bad for me, Lou.
So that's a look at Scrooge. It's available on Paramount Plus if you want to seek it out over the Christmas period. I have a lot of love for this. This is Richard Donner, one of my favourite filmmakers. This, for me, is one of my favourite versions of A Christmas Carol because it's doing something with the subject matter. It's not just it is. The irony is it's replicating what we have seen done hundreds of times before on the big screen, on the small screen, and on books, as Maria kindly pointed out as well. But it does it and it makes its own thing. And I think the things that make it work are Richard Donner as just a great filmmaker who is able to go from genre to genre at ease and do it without trying to bring his own style or something. He knows what he needs to do. And also he is sitting back and let Bill Murray do Bill Murray's thing as a cynical TV producer who has no problems about stapling reindeer or stapling antlers to little mice. So I don't know, where does this version of Christmas Carol stand for you? I'll come to you first, Maria.
So for me, it was funny watching it because the last time I watched it, I think it was I was a teenager, and I think it was like it was shown in school, and I remember the teacher being like, "Don't look at that moment," and you know the moment I'm talking about. And yeah, it was funny watching it because I was like, I'd heard so much about it in between because so many people call it their favorite films, and I was like, it's a solid version, but it wasn't necessarily my favorite. I have to admit. I think for me, I enjoyed Bill Murray. I enjoyed what they did with it. I thought it was clever to have it based around the idea of like Christmas Eve, we're going to do a live version of A Christmas Carol, because it's what they still do in the States. They have like it's like Hairspray or something they did a couple of years ago in like ABC, you know, it's a big thing there. So I really enjoyed that kind of meta, you know, retelling of it all. But yes, it was a little bit too much for me at some parts, I think.
Okay, because I know we had Tim Burton on the show a couple of weeks ago, and Tim was kind of saying he had been doing a bit of research into it, and Richard Donner had planned for it to be a lot darker than what it intended to be. And there's a couple of sequences I don't know how to put it without seeming too sentimental and too much of a wuss. That's not the right way to put it either. But there's bits in this film always get me, and it's the sequences with a group of homeless people. And it's just after I think it's the sequence after he's visited the ghost of Christmas Present. He's been left by the ghost and he finds himself underneath, in the underground, with, I don't want to spoil too much, but someone who has passed away. And I find it tough. I find it always gets me, always gets a little kind of, it gets a bit sandy, a bit dry, wherever I'm watching it, whether in the cinema or whether I'm watching it at home. It's a film that works for me, and I think the more I watch it, as I mentioned and alluded to earlier, the amount of stuff when I was younger went over my head. And there's stuff even I was rewatching it for the prep for this show, and there was stuff I hadn't realised where it was kind of talking about nipples, but let's not talk about that. Let's not, we're pre-watershed, what had went completely over my head. But yeah, I enjoy it. I think it's a very strong version and a strong adaptation, and probably up there is one of my favourites. But Joe, what about you? Where does Scrooge rank for you?
Well, it's not my favourite, put it that way. Like you said, there's a lot to love about it. Richard Donner's direction is just fantastic. One thing neither of you touched upon, I thought the practical effects in it are fantastic, in the portrayal of each of the ghosts. But the thing that stands out for me, and it's bothered me no matter how many times I watch it, is I don't like Bill Murray in it. The thing is, I know Scrooge is supposed to be an unlikable character, and yes he is, and it is over the top, but it's in fitting and in tone with what Donner's trying to do. But I don't buy his redemption for a second. Like, he makes the big speech at the end, and I know it's famous and it's good and all that there, but he hasn't changed. I don't feel he's changed at all. And that's the whole point of the story. The whole point of the story is to see the error of your ways and to be fully redeemed. But I did not get that at all from Bill Murray's portrayal as Scrooge. Like I've seen it 2 to 3 times now already, and it's always the same response, and it leaves me a bit disappointed and it just falls a bit flat. But having said that, I love the supporting cast. Yeah. Karen Allen's just wonderful. Like, she just really lights up the screen anytime she's on it. Carol Kane's wonderful as the Ghost of Christmas Present. And I'm with her anytime she gives Bill Murray a good kicking. I feel like doing the same. It was even nice to see Robert Mitchum in as well. He's one of my favourite actors. But yeah, it's still one of the sticking points for me is Bill Murray's portrayal of Scrooge. It makes it difficult for me to really latch onto it.
Okay, interesting. You have the same problem as I had with Scrooge earlier on, our first film we talked about. Like you mean Karen Allen, just her smile. There's just a couple of sequences, particularly near the end, where it just cuts to her and she's behind the camera and it's just a little smile. And it makes me smile. As I say, I'm easily manipulated emotionally. Right. I get a sense you two really want to talk about the last film we've picked, and that of course is Brian Henson's Muppet Christmas Carol. It's this year celebrating its 30th anniversary. It's back in cinemas, but it's always in cinemas around Christmas time. But now we have the extra song, the missing song, When Love Is Gone, is back in all its glory. So before we let you two let loose about your favourite version of Christmas Carol, let's play a clip.
He was the greediest man alive.
It's Ebenezer Scrooge.
Until the night he met someone extraordinary.
Hello.
The Muppet Christmas Carol.
It's good to be heckling again.
It's good to be doing anything again.
Filled with holiday warmth.
Hey, like the lamp, not the rat, like the lamp, not the rat.
And Christmas spirit.
Scrooge.
Jacob Marley.
Scary stuff. Hey, should we be worried about the kids in the audience?
No, it's all right. This is culture.
So that's a look at Muppet's Christmas Carol. Joe, I'm going to come to you first. You didn't buy the redemption of Bill Murray in Scrooged. I think Michael Caine's portrayal of Scrooge, you buy the redemption by the end of the film. I've already said I do love Scrooged. I absolutely adore Muppet's Christmas Carol. And this week I rewatched it and I actually got out the soundtrack and I've been listening to the sound because the soundtrack, it's just a joy on its own. One More Sleep to Christmas, it is a film that makes me smile even thinking about it. So you two have been very clear. This is your favourite version that we're looking at anyway, specifically of these four. You might have other favourites, I don't know. But what is it about this film, Joe, that you love?
It's the Muppets, simply put. It's just an absolute joy from start to finish. It's just the sweeping music. That's in and of itself. The fact that it's a musical that really sweeps up in it. I know Spirited tried that and it didn't really work, but this is just wonderful. And just the choice for each of the Muppets in terms of what characters they play is just spot on and perfect. And the fact that they lean into that Muppet end of comedy, but it's still very much embedded with the themes and the emotions that are tied to Dickens' story perfectly. And Michael Caine, I'm sorry, he deserved an Oscar for this film. You know, you laugh, but I'm being deadly serious because, like you said, you really buy that redemption. When he first appears, he's extremely cold-hearted and that. He literally throws Muppets out the door, and I just was very angry. Don't do that to Muppets. And it just, as the film goes along, you see that softer edge of him, and you see that regret in his past because of his infatuation with greed, with money and greed. But by the thing about this version, I watched the extended version, and that song, When Love Is Gone, that really, really sells you the redemption end of things. I can see why it was cut. It does cut into the pacing, but it's a wonderful song, and I'm glad it's out there for people to view. But I absolutely love this version. I think it's the definitive version of Christmas Carol.
Okay, that's brave words. That's this week's hot take, possibly the last hot take of 2022. We'll have to see if Alan Meeb and I can beat that next week. But a lot of things I agree with you there, and particularly Michael Caine's portrayal. I mean, he's nasty and cruel to quite possibly one of the cutest cats that has ever existed. That he just breaks my heart. There's a little scene with him just shivering in the cold, and every time I want to watch it, I just want to go, come here. I just want to give you a hug. I want, things are going to be better. But, and I am going to come to you, Maria, but I want to come back to something as well. I mean, we have, it's narrated. We have Gonzo. He's playing Charles Dickens, but he's also Gonzo. Figure that one out, kids. But it leans into the darker elements of the tale. I mean, there is a point where Gonzo literally says, look, we're going to skip this bit. It's getting quite scary. We're going to be back for the happy bit at the end. So it's also reassuring because it's saying, look, it's going to get dark, but it will get better in the end. So yeah, I mean, I do like this. I know I'm being facetious when I'm kind of saying it's maybe not my favorite version. I'm just trying to, give some level of mystique. I'm not giving away, I'm playing all my cards, I'm not giving away all my cards just yet. But Maria, we've talked about 3 films already. We're now talking about Muppet's Christmas Carol. I get a sense by the smile on your face that this may well be your favorite version of the film. So why? Joe's put all his cards out there. Mm-hmm. Why are you such a fan of this?
I mean, I think it's just such a great adaptation. Like, I was watching it this week for the first time in quite a long time, and like I was laughing throughout it. I was crying at one point. The music's great. I've actually been rewatching the one clip where it's Kermit and Tiny Tim. That's like a really, really, I just loved it, every bit of it. And like you were saying about Michael Caine in it, I'm not sure if it was this film or if it was their Treasure Island, but there's a quote where they kind of say, the only way he thought that he could play the part was if he acted as if all of the Muppets were of equal, they were also human actors, he had to take it this seriously. And that is why it works so well. The scene in particular with The Ghost of Christmas Past, where he shows Scrooge the scene where Belle basically says, we're over. And you can see he's like, no, I don't want to see this. It's hurt him so much already, he doesn't want to have to see it again, And yeah, there's such beautiful highs and lows in the film, I could talk about it for hours, honestly. I loved it that much.
I am worried if we pull in the thread, we might make you cry. And you don't want to make you cry at Christmas, but it's happy tears. That's the way to look at it. Now, Joe's already mentioned that we have the song When Love Is Gone brought back in. And one thing from my rewatch, I didn't really pick up on before, because we have in the closing credit is When Love Is Found. And of course, that makes more sense when Love Is Gone is in the film, that final song. I know it's mostly played kind of in the finale and it's over the closing credits, but it makes more sense. So how did you find watching it with that song back in?
I mean, because I hadn't seen the film in so long, it actually made perfect sense to me to have that in there, thematically. And it just fit, again, with everything else, it just fit in perfectly with the rest of the film. I don't think I'd watch the shortened version, to be honest. I would always watch it from now on with that song added back in, definitely.
Yeah, because it's strange for me. I always knew the song because it's on the soundtrack, and I never placed it. Anytime I watch the film, I've been to see it. I usually go to see it every Christmas, you know, just to make myself feel good. Watch that and Die Hard, and I never noticed it not being in the film. And then it's only when I think last year, I think it was on Disney Plus, that they mentioned there's this version with that song in. It's like, oh. Suddenly I've realised I've missed all this. But look, I think we have been very positive, and I don't even need to ask either of you, is it the favourite version? Because we've pretty much said it is. It is our definitive version of Christmas Carol. But this is the point now where I'll open it up to you both and say, is there any other honourable mentions you want to throw out? I know you mentioned Spirited, Joe, which you didn't like. I did, and I think it's because I watched it straight after it and Matilda the musical back to back. I didn't like Matilda the musical, but I really enjoyed this, and I know it's Ryan Reynolds doing his shtick and Will Ferrell doing his shtick, but I thought the songs were strong. I thought it had its heart in its right place, and I thought it was trying to do something, again in a way with Scrooged, it was trying to do something quite clever with the tale. You weren't a fan, but I'll come to you first. Is there any other versions of Christmas Carol at this stage you want to give an honourable mention?
Yeah, there was a version, I don't know if it was last Christmas or the Christmas before, that BBC and FX worked together where Guy Pearce played Ebenezer Scrooge. It was like a mini-series in that there, and it really delved deep into the darker side of the story. I really, really appreciated that. And Andy Serkis, I think, was Marley in it, and he was just fantastic. But it's Andy Serkis, you know, he's great in everything. I really, really liked that version. No other ones really come to mind, because I'm sorry, whenever it comes to Christmas Carol, like I said, Muppets Christmas Carol is the definitive one. I can't really see anything in and around the Muppets.
Okay, I think if I'm right, I think the Peaky Blinders writer was the person who worked in that. Yes. So Maria, what about yourself? Is there anything else? We know it's not going to be your favourite. Nothing is going to supplant that. But right now, you have your moment. What would the other versions of Dickens' tale that you would give an honourable mention to at this stage?
No, I think for me, like, it's definitively the Muppets version. I also was going to mention the BBC drama. I have to admit, those are the ones that we watched this week are really the only ones I've seen. I was too frightened to watch the Jim Carrey version, to be honest. I didn't like the look of the animation. It looks really weird. But yeah, no, I think for me, it's definitively Muppets.
Yeah, you're not missing much with the Jim Carrey version. His CGI dead eyes, it's scary on its own. The other version I would give a shout out to, I know there was a channel, I think it was a Channel 4 production, or Channel 4 screened it, but I know it was also an audio book. Patrick Stewart, I know, played Scrooge for a version. I have the audio drama that I listen to always around Christmas when I'm driving and doing the parcel drop. I know I usually listen to that version. I think it's strong. I think the radio adaptation is much better than the actual version that we got on screens. That's only the one that comes to mind for me. Again, I know we'll be saying this next week on the end of year show. I'm sure there's versions of A Christmas Carol we have missed, but we've talked about Muppets, so that's all you really need. So look, that's us pretty much out of time on this week's show. So all that's left for me to do is thank my two guests. So thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you, Jim, and God bless us, everyone.
Oh God, see, you got me just as much in the heart as the Muppets Christmas Carol with Tiny Tim did not die. Maria, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim, and Merry Christmas.
Yes, and thanks very much for watching at home. Hope you all have a fantastic Christmas this year. We'll be back next week with our end of year show, as I'm joined by Alan Meeben as we look back at the cinematic highs and lows of the past 12 months. But for now, until then, goodbye. And a Merry Christmas, you filthy animal.
I'll drink to Mr. Scrooge, even though he is odious and stingy and badly dressed.
Humbug.